India says it's adamant to finish off what it calls leftist extremism as its army prepares for an all-out assault on Maoist rebels. But what's the price of such a military offensive, and can India eradicate Maoism in the country? This is Inside Story.
Hello there and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. A battle to the finish. India prepares for its largest offensive against the country's Maoist rebels. The conflict between the two sides has been going on for more than 4 decades, and now the government hopes an all-out assault will end the insurgency once and for all. It's expected some troops will be withdrawn from troubled Kashmir to fight the so-called Naxalites in an operation that will boast more than 100,000 troops. Now, the assault follows concerns expressed by India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh.
I have consistently held that in many ways the left-wing extremism poses perhaps the gravest internal security threat our country faces. We have discussed this in the last 5 years, and I would like to state frankly that we have not achieved as much success as we would have liked in containing this menace. It's a matter of concern that despite our efforts, the level of violence in the affected states continues to rise.
Well, before we get stuck into the discussion, a bit of background. The Maoists have been active since the 1960s, and according to Indian intelligence, up to 22,000 Maoist rebels are active in more than half of the country's 29 states, creating what's known as a red corridor from the country's northeast to the deep south. The movement is fragmented into several disputing factions, some of them politically inclined, while others involved in armed guerrilla fighting. In recent years, they've dramatically stepped up their attacks. Thousands have died in Maoist campaigns right across the country. They say they're fighting for the rights of the poor, but the Indian government considers them terrorists and recently banned their political wing from Parliament. Well, joining us now to discuss all this are our guests. In London, Radha D'Souza, she's a law lecturer at Westminster University. Also in London, Lawrence Sayers, he's Deputy Chair at the Centre of South Asian Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And in New Delhi, DC Nath, he's the President of the International Institute of Security and Safety Management. Let's start with you, Professor D'Souza. It all sounds like a pretty serious issue, well worth the attention, the money, the resources the Indian government is throwing at it.
Yes, the Indian government is throwing resources at it. And one only wishes that the resources were thrown at the issues that the Maoists are raising. Now, if you look at the national debate on this issue, everybody across the political spectrum agrees that there has been a serious failure of social justice, of development, and serious injustices to the poor. On this, I think everybody agrees. But the thing is, what are we doing about it? And instead of sending the armed forces there, if the government were to spend that money in actually doing something for the people there, I think they would have less of a problem on hand. But they're not doing that, and they see the military solution as the only option.
DC Nath, do you agree with that? The government caused this problem and they should deal with the issue itself rather than trying to stem it by military means?
Well, I think we'll have to get our perception very clear about this. Government of India, as far as we understand, is not been seeking military solution. One has to understand the nature of this movement. It has passed its initial stages of ideology. Secondly, they were trying to get at the paramilitary forces, police. But now, it is a definite move for capturing political power through armed struggle. So when a movement takes such a color, that has to be tackled, and Government of India has been taking now multi-pronged attack, but by no chance government has said that they are going for military solution. Well, the problem has to tackle, so there need to be some mobilization of security forces, But it must be very clear, those who are not in the country try to understand the problem on the ground. You see their documentation. The latest document, June 12, 2009, they made it abundantly clear that they are going to aggravate their movement, capture power, then capture arms and ammunition from the police. So that being the philosophy of the movement, you cannot have put them chicks for you just to suffer and their
okay, let's tell you what, let me bring in Professor D'Souza. I can see you're very eager to jump in there, so go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, let's get the troop numbers right here. This operation, what is called Green Hunt, has been on the anvil, and it has been planned for 1 year now. They are planning to send 20,000 troops. 35,000 troops are already there, and this is on top of 75,000 to 100,000 paramilitary forces like the Border Security Force and others who have already been deployed there, plus the state police. And every state police is, you know, a pretty large force.
Okay, so well, so it certainly seems like there's a fairly big military operation going on here. Let's bring in Mr. Lawrence Sayers.
It is a military.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Lawrence Sayers, how serious do you think the Naxalite threat is? And is the government going about dealing with it in the right way?
Well, I share the view that the Naxalite threat is a threat, especially in the areas where there is an impact of these specific groups where they operate. And I think that it necessitates the military action. I think that, as one of the speakers was saying, this operation has been in the works for almost a year. So there's training in terms of counterinsurgency operations and trying to coordinate between the federal government and the state and local police, which have not been very effective at dealing with these groups. But you need to have, in order to have the type of development that all of us would like to have in those areas. I mean, they're impoverished areas, but you have to get the law and order situation under control first. Then you can do the type of operations in terms of development, both physical and social infrastructure that would be required. But that's a long-term plan. The state has failed to do so over many years, and it's one of the reasons why the Naxalites have enjoyed some popularity in those areas. But
absolutely.
I'm skeptical
DC Natha, getting law and order under control first is a fair point, and there is this argument that the government is just trying to divert attention away from other issues, almost covering for the endemic poverty that there is in many of the regions where the Maoists run rife.
Well, I think, again, there's a question of correct perception. Government is certainly not trying to divert the issue or attention from social issues, social poverty and other complaints. Let us understand this very, very clearly. I am not defending the government. I am defending what is the correct measure to treat insurgency of this type. And it is a wrong notion. People are trying to intellectualize, if I may say so, this movement at this stage, when the movement leaders have openly declared they want to seize state power. What do? They are not going for so much uplift of the downtrodden people. That has to be understood very clearly. There's not a social revolution. It's a question of now seizing power. How do you counter this movement to seize political power except making a multi-pronged attack through armed resistance or whatever armed reaction is necessary?
Well, let's put that to Professor D'Souza. It's not a social revolution, Professor.
Well, I don't know where he gets that from, because I know that some years ago, the Andhra Pradesh High Court, I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, intellectuals here or anybody. The High Court said that increasingly people are seeing Naxalism as their only political option. In 2006, the Planning Commission set up a special committee, and Planning Commission is an advisory body to the federal government. Planning Commission said that there is institutionalized violence against the poor. Now, the point is, when these government's own advisory bodies are saying this, when judges of the High Court are saying this, what was the government's response? They set up, on a trial basis, they tried to set up a militia group called Sadhwa Jurum in Chhattisgarh, which was financed and trained by paramilitary forces and the state. And actually the Supreme Court had to say in a recent judgment that the governments can't arm paramilitary forces. And therefore, having failed in their attempt to privatize terror and to privatize repression, they have now had to directly come into confrontation. The point is that these are issues that have been raised for a long time, but the government cannot deal with it in any other way because democratic political spaces in the country have shrunk. Now, if you look at, we talk about violence and Maoists with regards to Maoists, but look at all political parties in India. The BJP engages in violence. We have memories of Gujarat and all the atrocities against Muslims fresh in our minds. We have the Shiv Senas, which engages in violence. We have a large number of members of parliament
I'd like to bring in Lawrence Size because I can see that he's shaking his head in disagreement.
Well, I'm shaking my head in disbelief more than disagreement. I mean, I think that's the issue is that we all agree that we all understand the reasons why the Naxalites have been popular and have grown in popularity, and I think the social backwardness of many of these areas is a key factor in their success. But it would be irresponsible for any government of any political stripe not to act against an armed insurrection of this type. I mean, I think that the troops level of the Naxalites is not that great. It's exaggerated in many respects.
But it's interesting, isn't it, Mr. Size, that the political leadership only gets stuck in when the situation seems to be about to spiral out of control. And there is this kind of theory that it's a very many of the areas where the Maoists are mineral rich, and there's concern perhaps that from the West that their foreign investments are under threat. And is that why perhaps the government is now focusing so much on this perceived problem?
I think that the minerals have always been there. I think that the level of the increase in terms of the number of casualties is worrisome, and so it is one of the reasons. And in the last election, in the last general election, many of these Naxalite groups were involved in violence and intimidation, and so that has increased over time. And it would be, like I said, it would be responsible for the government not to act in a coordinated and smart, strategy. At the same time, we always have to keep in mind that the Naxalites have been opposed to many of the central government's developmental plans in the area, in terms of electrification and so on, and so they're speaking with a forked tongue in many respects as how far and how pro-poor they may be.
Okay, so DC Nath, the Naxalites, the Maoists are speaking with a forked tongue. What do you say to that?
No, certainly. I'll only request my friend D'Souza to study the recent document of June 12. Whatever they might be doing or saying otherwise, but the document is a proof. What is their goal? So when I said that their goal is not social evolution, forget this, pardon my saying so, what the Andhra Pradesh High Court had said, or the Planning Commission report, we have seen that. There's a different study, different angle. But look at the facts on the ground. They are trying to seize political power through armed insurrection. No, that is a different issue. That's what we have to tackle, that political insurrection. For that, you cannot sort of romanticize this movement when it used to be done earlier, when the movement started. The movement has passed through different stages. Now it is an open struggle almost. How can a government sit title over it?
See, that movement operates within the wider context of India's political environment today. And today the reality is that it is not possible for ordinary people to engage in the political process if they do not have the support of some armed militia or some armed group somewhere. BJP, as I said, the number of MPs in parliament with criminal records, it has been a long-standing debate. The point is, all political processes have been criminalized, they have become violent, and India has become an increasingly violent society.
Okay, Professor D'Souza, I'm going to jump in there because I want to move this on. I want to move this on a little bit.
I'm sorry.
I just want to move this on a little bit. So in recent months, you'll know that the Indian government has been working closely with the United States in countering terror in the South Asian region. The two countries have been sharing intelligence and, of course, investigations. Earlier this month, in fact, India's Home Minister visited the US to discuss anti-terrorism efforts. Now, the meeting focused on counter-terrorism technology, institutions and structures and so forth. The US is also said to be helping India in this battle against the Naxalites. Now, the question is, we know the US has been involved in India, especially following the Mumbai attacks. But are they really interested in targeting Naxal groups, more used to taking out Taliban elements in AfPak and Afghanistan and in Pakistan? Let me put that to Lawrence Sayers.
Well, obviously the U.S. and I think most responsible governments would be concerned about the availability of armed insurgent groups in its homeland. So the U.S. has provided some assistance in terms of counterinsurgency operation technology and information sharing and the like to the Indian government, and I'm sure the Indian government has sought it elsewhere. I mean, it's not unique to one specific country or another.
But do you think the US would agree that they are the biggest threat to Indian security, as the Indian government says?
I seriously doubt it. I mean, I lived in London for 7 years, and in my 7 years of living here, I have not yet once heard Naxalites killing people and then making it to the newspaper. And I'm sure that in the U.S., most people wouldn't even know or heard about these groups. But it is a potential threat to the Indian state. And the U.S. has a great deal of interest in making sure that India is a solid and reliable ally and sovereign nation as it is, and that doesn't have the same situation that you have in Pakistan, where the state is collapsing. And so that is what the U.S. interest is to make sure that India is solid and doesn't have to face these threats and is willing to help in its campaign against terrorism.
DC Nath, it's fair to say that it's easier to deal with a threat, however large or small, when it's tarred with a terror brush, isn't it?
Yeah. No, let me also point this out to Professor D'Souza. We are trying to generalize the issue of increasing political violence in the country. But it is not certainly correct that the political parties today cannot do without violence or resort to any violent means. I'll only request Professor D'Souza or any other neutral visitor to go around the country and see what the level of ordinary violence. It will be giving a very wrong notion or idea to the outside world that is all teeming with violence and political violence. Our perception, I'm a security analyst, that this Naxalite problem earlier had not been solved because of, if I may put it, political will. Perhaps only last few years, after the Prime Minister has spoken, some political will has been generated. And government is trying to convince not only Naxalites, Maoists, and also the intellectuals in the country through various propaganda that how this has to be faced. It will be too, I should say, superfluous or incorrect to generalize the issue.
All right, I'll tell you what, let's hear from a social activist who works with displaced tribal people. Mamta Dash says the state needs to address the Maoist problems rather than alienate them further.
It is a political issue, and it has to be dealt with politically. And, staging or waging a war against, whether Maoist or the resistances by people is not the solution.
And it certainly seems to be a fair point, doesn't it, Professor D'Souza?
That what? You can't fight your own people. I mean, that is a fair point. No state. See, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a lawyer. And my sanad, my obligation is to defend the Constitution. The Constitution says that the institutions of the state are obliged in the first instance to enforce the Constitution, which says that we will strive for justice, social, economic, and political. That's what the Indian Constitution says. It doesn't just say liberty, equality, fraternity. It defines what justice means. And justice is social, economic, and political. Now, when for 60 years the people have not seen any of that, they aren't. And when we find that political space is shrinking, and that political means for alternate solutions have not worked for whatever reasons, and on the one hand the government is sending military. Look at it today. the government is sending the military on the one hand. On the other hand, it has enacted the Special Economic Zones Act, which is going to acquire land in 552 special economic zones throughout the country. It has nominated land acquisition for nuclear plants in Maharashtra, in Andhra Pradesh, and so many other places. It is continuing. Now it has introduced a new bill on Land Acquisition Act, which is going to redefine the meaning of public purpose for land acquisition.
Is a wholesale military offensive? Is a wholesale military offensive?
On the other hand, there is.
Let me just say, is a wholesale military offensive the correct way forward in this to strive for justice?
I don't think so.
Let's put that to Lawrence Sayers.
No, I mean, obviously it's not. I think, in fact, the Indian government's official position is that the military is one of many approaches, including other economic development programs. It has also a program with respect to trying to rehabilitate the Naxalites and so on. It's a that's the official position. And nobody, I mean, in their right mind would think that the military solution is the only one. What is nonsense, however, is the viewpoint that political space has shrunk. It is not the case at all. In fact, over the last 20 years, we have seen a broadening of the constituencies. People who were out of power or who had no votes now are expressing themselves politically. This is a big transformation that is happening. Some of it we may agree with, and some of it we may not agree with. But it is a country that has been able to incorporate more and more groups into its political space. And I'm sure that the Naxalites themselves would be participants in such a society should they wish to choose to do so. But they haven't. They have chosen instead, perhaps animated by the prospect of having a takeover of government like they have had in Nepal, to have something similar in India, and that the Indian government is not going to tolerate.
Okay, let me bring in DC Nath at this point. What do you say to that?
Well, I still hold the belief, or is a fact in life, that you cannot say that Indian government is not looking for social justice. You see, you interact with the various political parties. They have certain tinge of political violence, I agree, but government of India, the country as a whole, wouldn't have made the progress it has made in the world as such unless we had really looked for economic justice or social justice. We have made mark, if you go by social indicators, economic indicators, country has progressed. Do you think that government of India had only military solution in mind? You go into government literature, discuss with them, there is never used that we are going for any military solution at all. It's a mix now.
Professor D'Souza, just we're just running out of time. So in 20 seconds, if you'd like to sum up your views for us.
Well, some of as far as social statistics are concerned, we have seen an alarming rise in malnutrition. I think if the government is serious about engaging with this issue politically and serious about its claims to do social justice, first it must demonstrate that it is serious by taking some concrete action. For example, most of the recent struggles are around land under the Special Economic Zones Act. Let them repeal that act and let them, withdraw it. Let them withdraw the bill on land acquisition acts, and then the nation will know that they are serious about political justice and they can come forward to engage with the process. But they are not doing anything. On the one hand, they are sending the military. On the other hand, they are having more and more legislation to take more and more land. Why should people believe in that? I mean, this is a problem, because we talk about the economic issues in a separate box and we talk about the military issue in a separate box. Simultaneously, the government is doing both things. It is saying we are for social justice, but it's introducing legislation. Now there is a current bill pending. I mean, let them withdraw all this thing and let them demonstrate that they're serious about the social justice.
Okay, clearly many and varied views about the way forward. We've run out of time. Professor Radha D'Souza, Lawrence Sayers and DC Nath, thank you very much indeed for your illuminating thoughts and discussions. Thank you very much. And thanks for watching the program. Any thoughts about this or ideas about future editions of Inside Story, just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.